Det er Afghanistan, ikke?
Mhm.
Det der er Danmark, ikke?
Kom.
Ja.
Kom.
Far.
Mhm.
Rejser du igen?
Det er for at sikre og hjælpe civilbefolkningen, så de kan få et liv.
Salam alaikum. Bye-bye.
Så de kan genopbygge deres land.
Hvor vi går på patruljer og føler os som skydeskiver. Drengene er magtesløse, altså de må ingenting. Mændene kan ikke rigtig se noget formål med at gå.
Det er fordi, at jeg er nødt til lige at fortælle dig, at Julius han har altid været op og slås med de andre drenge i dag.
Vi skal have lagt en sonde på ham.
Du er super god.
Det må hun er hele tiden.
Hallo?
Kan jeg høre mig?
Jeg hører dig. Hej. Hej, skat.
Og du har det godt?
Jeg har det fint.
Fortæl mig også, det er et andet.
Jeg har gået fra hjem.
Vi skal have os ud nu. Jeg skulle da ligeglad med, hvem der er derinde for helvede. Så sig jeg ved, hvem der er derinde!
Chefen sidder på dit kontor.
Jeg skal oplyse dig om, at du er sigtet for at have bombet et civilt mål, og derved forårsaget 11 civile død.
Jeg havde en stærk formodning om, at der befandt Taliban inde i...
Stopper lige der, Claus. Havde du PID?
Han siger, at hans mænd ligger og bløder af. Det må da være hans pligt at redde sine mænd.
I den her butik, som er min butik, der sælger jeg frifelt. Moral og etik, det er slet ikke min afdeling.
Hvad fanden skulle jeg have gjort?
Det handler ikke om, hvad du skulle have gjort. Claus, det handler om, hvad du gør nu.
Thank you.
So first of all, there's a lot of things that happen in this movie that seem very real. So walk us through a little bit how much of real life you brought to sort of creating this scenario, both the battle scenes and everything that happens as the fallout.
Well, almost all of the soldiers are real Danish veterans that served in Afghanistan. So I had Pilou, the actor, and a couple of other guys to help me carry the emotion throughout the plot. But the rest of it is real soldiers who knew what they were talking about. And the Afghans in the film is refugees from Helmand province who lived in a refugee camp in Turkey when we shot the film. So they knew everything about their lives as well. So we tried to bring on what you can call witnesses of war, people who knew what this was all about. I would feel like a tourist if I tried to explain it. So I needed experts. So I brought in a lot of soldiers and they helped me. There's a lot of scenes in there that I didn't really direct. I just listened a lot to what to do and slowly started to understand the military language. And then we would try to challenge the soldiers in a way so that because they're not actors, they don't know how to recreate a situation and a feeling again and again, but they can definitely react to the reality they're in. So all the radio communication I did live. So I would have a commander by my side at the monitor, and then we would just throw information at them through the radio, and we would tap the line and use it in the film. So we never redid it in a studio. We would just do that like a documentary, and it meant that the soldiers needed to be alert all the time. The same thing with the explosions and the stuff that we have there. I changed the timing for every take, so they never knew when it was going to happen. So they just needed to stay alert and react to what happened instead of waiting for their time to say their part. So yeah, a lot of professionals in there.
You know, the second half of the film is consumed by a totally different kind of environment, and there's so much courtroom conversation. So even if this isn't exactly a real life event, how much of sort of the legal background did you go through to figure out, you know, what this guy could be getting in trouble for here?
The hardest part of doing this film was to understand the military logic and language and all the legal stuff. It's extremely complex. We had, at the time, a military prosecutor in Denmark called Krigen, and he had been working some of these cases. against soldiers who came home from Afghanistan and Iraq, and a certain defense attorney had these cases from his side, and they didn't like each other. I had seen stuff on TV where they kind of badmouth about each other in interviews after cases, and then I decided to just. I called one of them and said, "Can you be in my office for coffee like 10:15 tomorrow?" And he said, "Yes, sure, I'll come." And then I called the other guy and said, "Can you be at my office tomorrow 10:30?" And then he would come 15 minutes later, and suddenly both of them would be in the same room. And that opened up for a really interesting conversation, and I ended up writing the whole trial with them. They kind of gave me their best shots at each other. And slowly we would boil it down to what became the script and the screenplay. So they became friends, and now they're lecturing around Denmark together. So it became a peace-creating mission, this movie.
I want to ask you a little bit about Klaus's character in particular, because one of the things that's so fascinating about the two different parts of the movie is that we're there with him when all of these things happen, and at least the way I experience, you really feel like he's sort of this heroic character, and then you see what happens when the facts are sort of extracted and presented in certain ways. So how do you sort of go about scripting that dynamic so there's a little bit of ambiguity? We're not totally sure if he's guilty or if he's innocent, or even if those terms are applicable here.
Well, basically, I looked at the movies that meant most to me in film school was all the war films coming out of U.S. in the 70s and early 80s. And I knew that I wanted to do a war film, but I wanted to do my version of it. I couldn't just, what I saw there and which I loved was the stories about the dehumanization of a character. You would take a young man and you'll send him to war, and then you'll follow how he falls apart as a human being. And I thought, well, if we do the opposite, we will humanize these guys. And a way to do that is to make the soldier somebody's father and somebody's husband, and suddenly there's a full person there. It's not just a guy in a uniform. Part of the dehumanization of being a soldier is that you're put into a uniform and you look like everybody. So the individual expression is lost, and you kind of forget that you're looking at a human being, but you're just looking at a soldier. But to build an emotional relationship with his family made him more real to me. And that was basically my aim in writing it. When do I start to feel, I had to constantly ask myself, when do I feel that he's just a soldier? And if I ever detected that, I needed to put something in there that could remind me that it was a human being. To not go down the trial of simplifying him as a person and dehumanizing him, but doing the opposite instead.
And the other thing you seem to be doing is sort of working around the possibility of a political element here. That even though we know that there's the Taliban and certain reference points that are familiar, this seems to be a running theme in your work. I mean, it's no coincidence that you made one film called A Hijacking and another one called A War. So how much of those specific details that are sort of rooted in, real wars that are going on today did you think about versus, kind of keep staying out of it? Because we only get a few details that tell us this is happening, basically now.
And I'm sorry if this is going to take like a minute, but for me it's interesting anyway. In film school, we once had a language professor come to give us a lecture, and he said, if you tell me a story about a cow, you'll go, yesterday I saw a cow, and then I crossed a bridge and I went up to the church. Everybody who's listened to that story will have developed their own cow, their own bridge, and their own church in their mind. They've seen a cow and a bridge and a church before. It doesn't really matter whether we're thinking about the same cow, bridge, or church, but we are at the same place. I feel that it's the same thing here. If I start to say, yesterday I saw a cow and it had a brown back leg and then the tail went like that and there was flies, everybody leaves their own cow and they start to really work hard to make sure that they get my cow right. And then we have lost the identification and the emotional connection to each other, and we are now in an intellectual space. And basically that was the ground rule of writing the script, not to give too many specific details about this date, this location in Afghanistan. If I'd done that, we wouldn't experience that human being, we would experience that intellectual creature sitting there making sure that we got it right. So that was the whole intention of leaving out all the stuff that I didn't really need to know or need to tell, to make sure that we got this tale of a human being in a problem.
It wasn't too long-winded, don't worry about it. Before we open it up to questions, I wanted to get a sense from you about and the film's been around for a little bit. What sort of feedback do you get on the home front? Over here we get sort of trapped in our own understanding of the American military and our relationship to that war. We tend to forget there's a lot of different troops over there. So what's that experience been like for you?
That's fun. There's like two anecdotes in that perspective. I've been invited to lunch by a Danish folk party, which you can say is a mildly nationalist in the far right in Danish parliament. They invited me to lunch, I guess because they felt that this movie represented their point of view. And then again, Enhedslisten, another party on the far left, invited me to lunch because I guess that they felt that it represented their point of view. And I've never been so pleased. I never went to any of those lunches, but nevertheless, I felt that okay, we kind of gave we did good in showing every aspect of this. The one thing that meant most to me, and 2 days after the premiere in Denmark, I was taking my kids to school in the morning, and this gentleman walked around me, and he kept on staring at me. And then, from a distance, he started to cry, and I got a little scared. I had forgotten that I'd been on TV the night before, so I thought that it was a crazy guy. And I had these 3 small boys there, so I was on my way away, and then he came over and he said, I just want to say thank you. I saw your film last night. I saw it with my wife. I've served 4 times in Afghanistan, and we have never talked about this. And now for 12 hours, I've told her everything that I've done down there, and maybe our marriage have a chance in the future. Thank you. And then he left. And I called Pilou, the actor, right away. I said, fuck the reviewers. We got this, man. We made a point. Yeah.
That was the best review you got. Yeah, exactly. We have questions from the audience. Shoot your hand in there and bring you in. Yeah, over there.
So one of the things that I was kind of, I don't know, I guess, again, not to be long-winded or whatever, but coming from a background as like a lawyer and coming from a family of defense lawyers, I thought, the way that the prosecutor or the judge advocate or whatever was portrayed to me was very interesting because, like I said, my family is largely like defense attorneys, so, there's a very special type of person, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way, that's drawn to prosecutorial stuff. But how do you, and she's, portrayed sort of smug and is like I don't want to say like she like is portrayed as a villain at all, but like she is portrayed as sort of, like I said, smug, I suppose, is the best way that I can put it. But how do you sort of tie together the fact that there are legitimate concerns about, human rights abuses and like, extrajudicial killings and, stuff that's going on, and does a portrayal of, because she seems very like overzealous for sure, in her desire to prosecute, this character, obviously, but like how does her portrayal sort of like delegitimize like an actual like need to address human rights issues?
Just for the people who didn't hear up front, the question was about the smug portrayal of the prosecutor in the case.
We really tried to do a job just to portray her. It's such a small screen time she has. I feel that she's right. I think that she's in a very, very hard position. The talks I had with Krigen, the Danish prosecutor, was all about there's no really crime scene investigations there to lean on. So all you have is witnesses, and it's really hard trial to try a hard case to work. And nevertheless, I feel that she's extremely right. She says that if we allow this, if we accept it, then we become somebody we don't want to be. And for me, that's totally right. If this was just about him being a soldier and doing this, I wouldn't be in doubt, send him away. And that was how I felt in the news when I was in my couch, comfortable, looking at what happened in Afghanistan. The big problem for me becomes when I connect to people on a human level, then what's right and wrong. And that complexity I wanted to defend more than anything else. I felt it would be too easy to decide what was good and what was bad, what was black and what was white. I wanted to find the nuances and put it in there. So that became the aim. And you can say that she's kind of two-dimensional, but at the same time, I feel that she struggles. She puts up a really good struggle and tries to do what she can. And she's actually defending the values that puts our nation and Denmark together. We insist on being a democracy. We insist on these things. That doesn't nevertheless change the complexity of us sending young kids to war and learn them, teach them how to kill, and teach them how to save each other, and then prosecute them when they get back home. There is a contradiction in that that's extremely interesting. How can we think that you can fight wars civilized? How do you think that you, with bullets flying over your head, can remember and follow rules? And how can we test these rules in trials and expect it to become civilized in any way? I'm not sure of that answer, and that was what inspired me to do the film in the first place.
There's a hand way in the back before. Somebody? No? Okay.
Kind of following up what you're saying, since you've had dealings with actual Danish soldiers. Being a soldier in a hostile territory, you have to almost assume every national there is an enemy until you find otherwise. How do they keep their humanity to see an individual when your own life is at stake? Did you get any answers from them, how they did that?
Not really. You could say the same about the Taliban warriors that I talked to, researching for this film. It's all people caught up in a very, very difficult situation. A lot of them ended up there without really knowing why. I mean, it's not like the Danish soldiers go down there to say, I want to implement this value in the world. It's a job. They're young kids. They're going for an adventure and not realizing what they're getting into. A lot of the Taliban fighters not even realize what Taliban is. They used to fight the Russians with the Mujahideens, and now suddenly, to put bread on the table, they fight this. And that was the most interesting stuff for me, was to start to going besides the obvious questions to soldiers and getting into the understanding of what this is all about. And I can see it on a political level, but on a human level, it's really, really hard to see what's going on. Nevertheless, I met extreme professionalism with these guys, but we also meet guys who needs to be more made of iron, and they get hardened throughout this process. And you can see guys who forget their human values in the process of being to war for half a year with what they see, and they get suspicions and they get a bit paranoid about what happens around. And I totally understand that, but I'm not sure that they all knew how to cope with it. Nevertheless, I met guys who wanted to tell and share those stories and share the vulnerability, being those persons who actually fought those wars.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I like the most about war and hijacking is your films are gritty. They stay within the confines of reality. You don't really succumb to unnecessary melodrama. And they're somewhat understated, especially compared to Hollywood. So my question for you is, as a filmmaker, what's your philosophy in terms of when it's okay to either bend or take liberties with the truth, or sort of go outside what might realistically happen in one of these situations?
In both, and thank you, in both this film and the hijacking, I made one decision. I said, I don't want to be a slave of the plot. Often you will bend the truth to make sure that the plot, you want to search for the best drama, not necessarily the best version, And I basically just decided to, if I couldn't solve a dramatic problem by finding the answers in reality, I needed to keep on looking. I couldn't make something up. I'm not amused by my own imagination. I find it really boring. After 2 hours in an office with me making stuff up, it becomes lonely and boring. So I like to go out and talk to people. And every time I've met a person, and started to talk to them, everybody wants to tell their own story. Everybody wants to share experiences of life, which is wonderful and which makes us human and connects us through generations and across borders. And I feel that that's interesting. And I've always found an answer to the questions we had. Sometimes we had to do a detour. Sometimes we had to not tell the way I thought it would be. But nevertheless, we could find a way where we could dramatize reality in a way so it stayed true to what we're doing. And basically, that's a discipline. I mean, it's so easy. And it's so, I often want to just go down and start references to other films instead of reference to the reality that I'm part of. And that's basically it. I mean, I realized that a lot of police movies about police officers, there's always this one police officer who's going to retire in 2 weeks. And he's always, in 2 weeks, he's going to go fish. You know, he's going to go fishing. And I started to wonder, you know, police officers, there must be police officers out there who want to play the trumpet or start cooking or learn Spanish. Or, what do I know? But it's kind of a fictional decision that we've made and references to other films. Well, if you're a police officer and you're going to retire, you want to go fish, man. And that bores me. I mean, that's how we degenerate stories and how we degenerate culture is by telling the same one-dimensional truth again and again and again instead of actually making it human. And the beauty of it is that all of us in here, we are brought up with a full life where we every day enter doors and meet strangers. And we all have the talent of sensing who is this person that I'm meeting now. We don't need the full background. We don't need all kinds of cliche answers. We can sense what kind of human being we're in front of. And I think that talent is often left outside the theater. In the wardrobe, when you hang your jacket, you hang that talent, then you go in and sit down, and you have to get it spelled out so extremely strong so the realism leaves the story. And we just try to do the opposite and, you know, have some faith in the audience to actually be able to understand human beings, even though they are on the big silver screen.
So Klaus doesn't go fishing after he's exonerated, basically. We have time for one more. Right over there, yeah.
I have a question about your sound design, actually, in some respects, your lack of sound design. In the phone calls early in the picture, you only heard one side of it. You didn't hear the other person speaking. So what were you trying to, and actually there were many other places where it was very quiet. What were you trying to achieve with that?
Well, basically, you know, when I'm looking at somebody on the phone, I always just hear one side, unless they put on speaker. And I feel that I often, in the train or in the bus, listening to strangers' conversations, I totally get the conversation, even though I only get half of it. So we don't need it. And making that decision keeps it real, it keeps it close to the reality that I know. So that was the idea. I feel that sound design have been used to manipulate in a lot of films. And the problem with that is that sound design is part of a realistic expression. If you wanna make a film realistic, and if you wanna work in naturalism, you definitely need the sound to be naturalistic as well. And very, very rare we have scores to our lives. Once in a while we put on a Walkman or listen to music in the streets, and then we have a number that kind of, you know, explains that the mood of that day. But nevertheless, it's not that often, and I felt it needed to be the same way in the film. All the phone calls and the radio communication we did live. So when we were in Turkey shooting the Afghan part, I would have the actors back home in Denmark. So the mistakes was live. So the broken lines is real, and the actors needed to react to it instead of just me recreating it in post-production. And that gave alertness to their acting in a way that I found funny. And then I remember bringing in the soldiers, some of the soldiers, when we were doing the battle scene. And I was a little afraid of their judgment. And then they said, well, it's good, but it doesn't sound like that. And I thought that it sounded like that because it sounded like any other war film that I've seen, right? And then we went out to a shooting range, and they would get ammunition and guns for us. And then we would place mics around in the area and shoot just above the mics. So the sound of the bullets flying by and top suddenly became real because of a real bullet, you know, crossing the mics. And that gave something that everybody finds extremely real, and I'm pleased with that, but I really don't know because I haven't been to war. But what I understand is that it's always it's not as loud, and it's not as much fire as in films. It's always a lot of dust and sand, and it doesn't sound like it sounds different, and you can feel it. So we tried to aim for that, and that was the reason I brought in. I mean, the soldiers have been working day and night to do this film with me because they've always been there to make sure that I didn't get anything wrong.
So you've given us a lot to think about, and the timing is really good because not only are you nominated for an Oscar, but the film is opening theatrically this week. So tell all your friends. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.